The year was 1998, an odd time to be alive for sure. Bill Clinton found himself at the center of a whirlwind of sexual mishaps, Steven Tyler expressed strong misgivings about closing his eyes, and PlayStation 1 owners found themselves in a very rare state of being spoiled for choice when it came to Japanese role-playing games. But believe me when I say none of us were ready for what was coming next. Parasite Eve takes place in modern-day New York and focuses on two main characters, Aya Brea, a tough-as-nails rookie police officer, and her diametric opposite in Eve, a creature manifested from evolved mitochondria with the goal of wiping out mankind and giving birth to a new race of beings. While attending an opera event, Aya witnesses Eve's awesome power firsthand, and also discovers her own ability to resist Eve's control over human mitochondria. As the only person who can come near Eve without bursting into flames or completely liquefying, Aya takes it upon herself to stop mankind's imminent destruction and maybe find out what makes her so special along the way. Parasite Eve's story was refreshingly different and as such really reflected the time it came out. Sure, we had RPGs set in quasi-modern settings before, but no game before it was able to achieve such a high level of realism. Being set in modern-day Manhattan lends some realism and an almost Hollywood-esque feel to what is essentially a sci-fi story depicting some type of cellular rebellion. Throughout the story, Aya is faced with several revelations that sits her a little closer to Eve on the biological scale than she's comfortable with, and the whole time she's struggling with a sense of shame and guilt for being what she is. But beyond the general plot, the one thing that elevates the story above its peers is a likable and well-written cast of side characters. Aya's partner Daniel is well fleshed out and relatable, even though a very small amount of exposition is thrown his way. It's obvious right off the bat that he's a family man and looks over Aya like some kind of foul-mouthed, overly protective big brother. Aya's intellectual support comes from Kunihiko Maeda, a Japanese scientist who has knowledge of a similar incident that took place in Tokyo. His nervous mannerisms and the fact that he loves giving Aya useless good luck charms is, let's face it, really cute. But good story is only a portion of what makes this a great experience. Parasite Eve's unique gameplay is probably what most people think of first. So, let's get into it. Taking inspiration from Capcom's success with survival horror, Squaresoft somehow churned out a game that was half Final Fantasy and half Resident Evil. After choosing an area of Manhattan to visit via this really cool looking world map, the game controls like a typical survival horror game. You'll be wandering around pre-rendered locations, using fixed camera angles and searching the environment for items and weapons until something very out of the ordinary happens. Yes, this is a survival horror game that has random battles, and really fun ones at that. Once in a fight, Aya can move freely in real time, but when her active time bar fills up, actions are decided in a turn-based, menu-driven style. Aya's attack range varies depending on what weapon is equipped, and this is represented by a circular 3D grid, but shooting at enemies isn't your only option. Because of her control over her mitochondria, Aya can use abilities that work pretty much like magic spells, providing a nice bit of variety to the combat. And if we're on the subject of variety, we have to talk about the staggering amount of weapons there are to collect in this game. From rifles and pistols to grenade launchers, if you have a preference, best believe this game's got you covered. Each of the game's gun types feels unique and carries out its own little strategy. Rifles can be great for longer ranges, but they take a while to aim and shoot, while SMGs offer a faster rate of fire but lower range. Now that's all well and good, but this wouldn't be an RPG if there weren't some type of customization, right? So instead of having control over your base stats, all the focus is on customizing your arsenal. Each weapon has 3 main stats and enough room for special attributes like elemental effect, command bonuses, and number of attacks possible. Now the cool part is that these are all transferable to any other gun using tools that can be found in limited quantities throughout the story. So for example, if you like the rate of fire on some new gun that you found, you can use a tool to transfer it over to your current weapon. But you better hope that's the only stat you want to transfer, because once you take one thing from a gun, it's turned into scrap and gone forever. This one little feature can easily become a huge metagame within the main story and can be more than a little addictive. Out of my last 9-hour playthrough, I easily spent 2 of those hours tinkering and making the perfect gun. And while it's easy to go online and look up the most efficient builds, it's much more satisfying to jump in blind and make something that's really your own. As a Squaresoft game in the 90s, it should be no surprise that Parasite Eve was beautiful for its time. 3D models are much more detailed than those found in Square's last graphical tour de force, Final Fantasy VII, and possess much more convincing animations. Backgrounds are obviously pre-rendered, and I think we all know how much I love them by now. But one thing that helped PE stand out other than, well, everything else, was its wealth of CG cutscenes. Around every corner and for every big set piece, you can expect an incredibly impressive use of late 90s computer graphics. And even though the upscaling my FrameMeister is doing is causing these block boundary style compression artifacts to be much more noticeable, trust me when I say these CGs looked amazing in their day, giving the game the moniker of a cinematic RPG in advertisements. Of course, you can't talk about Parasite Eve without mentioning Yoko Shimomura's masterpiece of a soundtrack. Marrying high-octane electronic beats with classical piano, Shimomura was able to masterfully match the mood of any scene, and without her backing it up, this game wouldn't be nearly as impactful. Okay, so in the spirit of fairness, I do have to mention 2 giant flaws with this otherwise incredible game. First and most importantly, you are going to notice right off the bat that Aya controls like she's running through molasses. Her run speed is ridiculously slow, and it doesn't even match her animation, sort of like she's taking 2 steps for every 1 actually gained. The good news is the whole game is balanced around this, so combat isn't broken or anything, but when there's a large open area to traverse, trust me, you're going to notice it. The second issue you're likely to run into is the pixel-perfect positioning you're going to need to have if you want to activate something or pick an item up. I can't tell you how many times I got lost thinking I checked every inch of an area just to find out that drawer I tried to open can only be accessed from a few pixels to the left of where I was trying. While both of these problems are big and noticeable throughout the entire game, they don't affect it as negatively as you might think, and ultimately do little to take away from such an amazing experience. And I assure you this is an amazing experience. Parasite Eve was, and continues to be, one of the most unique role-playing games ever released. Its hybrid combat and memorable story is representative of the experimental time of its release, and harkens back to a day when games took chances. If you can't tell by now, Parasite Eve means a lot to me, because it came to me at a point in my life when I was still figuring out exactly who I was, and as lame as it sounds, I think video games played a big part in that. Games like Parasite Eve got me excited to experience unexplored worlds and take part in new stories, but sadly, it seemed to mean a little less to the gaming public. Even though it pushed a respectable number of units, it never really made quite the same impact as other RPGs of its day, and holds more of a cult hit status nowadays. But things are looking up. Its emergence on PSN means modern gamers all over the world can get a taste of a real RPG classic. And since it stays around the $20 range on eBay, there shouldn't be any hurdles between it and any of you that want to play it. But if there are, believe me when I say, they are hurdles worth jumping. Well guys, thanks for coming along on this look back at Parasite Eve's first entry. Make sure to join me next week when we cover its infamous sequel to find out whether or not it's possible to follow such a fan favorite. But until then, I'm Jared, and this is Avalanche Reviews. Hey guys, thanks for stopping by. If you liked what you saw here, maybe think about hitting those subscribe and like buttons. And if you're the generous type, maybe check out my Patreon page, throw a little support my way.